You son of a... Mark spat, backing toward the door. This isn't over, James. I'll find you. I didn't move as he bolted out of the storage unit, disappearing into the night. Moments later, red and blue lights flashed across the lot, illuminating the scene as police swarmed in. It had been 5 years, 5 long years, since I last spoke to Sarah, my ex-wife. 5 years since the day I packed my things, slammed the door, and walked away from the wreckage of what I once believed was a perfect marriage. I had convinced myself that I had moved on, buried her memory in some forgotten corner of my mind. But some ghosts refused to stay buried. That evening, I was slouched on the couch after work, absently flipping through TV channels when my phone rang. Expecting yet another spam call, or perhaps a quick chat with my buddy Jake, I glanced at the screen. And then I froze. Sarah. Her name lit up on the screen, a name I hadn't seen in years. My chest tightened. What could she possibly want now? Was it a mistake? A pocket dial? I stared at the phone, letting it ring, half hoping it would stop. It didn't. Against my better judgment, I answered. Hello. My voice came out cautious, colder than I meant. There was a pause on the other end, just the sound of her breathing. Then I heard her voice. Soft, almost shaky. Hey, James. It's me. I gripped the phone tighter. That voice used to feel like home, but now it sounded like a storm I had spent years avoiding. Yeah, I know who it is. What do you want, Sarah? She hesitated. Can we talk? Please. It's important. Everything in me screamed to hang up, but something in her tone gave me pause. It wasn't the confident, sharp-tongued Sarah I remembered. She sounded desperate. Important? I repeated, my tone still guarded. What could possibly be so important after all this time? Just hear me out, she whispered. Please, James. It's about everything. About us. About what happened. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't thought about us in years. At least, that's what I told myself. I had built walls around those memories, walls so high I didn't think they could ever come down. But now here she was hammering at those gates. I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. Fine. Talk. There was another pause, as if she didn't know where to start. Finally, she spoke. I made a mistake, James. A huge one. And I know I can't undo it. But something's happened. I need to tell you the truth. The truth. I scoffed bitterly. Bit late for that, don't you think? She didn't argue. Her voice cracked instead. You don't understand. I have to tell you. Please, can we meet? Just once. You deserve to know. Her audacity almost made me laugh. Meet her? After everything? After 5 years? My mind shouted at me to hang up, to walk away. But something, curiosity, anger, or maybe the sting of old wounds, made me hesitate. Tomorrow, I said at last. The diner on 8 noon? Sarah let out a shaky breath, almost like relief. Thank you, James. Thank you. I hung up before she could say more, my mind spinning. What was this about? Why now after 5 years? As I sat in the silence, I realized I wasn't ready for whatever she had to say. But tomorrow, I would find out. And deep down, I had this sinking feeling it would change everything. The next morning felt heavier than usual. I woke early, but instead of heading to the gym or diving into my emails as I usually did, I sat in silence, staring at the ceiling. Sarah's voice echoed in my mind. You deserve to know. Deserve to know what? That question clawed at me, relentless. I had buried the past deep, but now it was surfacing again, and I hated that I still cared. By the time I arrived at the diner on 8th Street, the air felt different. Heavy, suffocating. I'd chosen this diner for a reason. It wasn't fancy, and it held no sentimental value. Just a quiet little spot with cracked leather booths and coffee that tasted as greasy as the grill. Neutral ground. As I walked in, my eyes scanned the room and landed on her immediately. Sarah was sitting in the back corner, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug as if it could somehow solve all her problems. She looked different, not just older, though the years had certainly left their mark, but there was a weariness in her face I didn't recognize. When she saw me, she straightened, forcing a smile, the same disarming smile she used to use when trying to get out of trouble. This time it didn't work. James, she greeted softly as I approached. I slid into the booth across from her, keeping my face cold. Sarah. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sounds of the diner filled the space between us. The clink of plates, faint chatter, the hiss of coffee being poured. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. "Thanks for coming," she said carefully, her tone testing the waters. "Let's skip the small talk," I replied, leaning back in the booth. "You said I deserve to know the truth. So start talking." She looked down, her hands trembling slightly as they gripped the mug. "I don't even know where to begin," she murmured. "How about with the part where you cheated on me?" I snapped, the bitterness spilling out before I could reel it back. I hadn't planned to lash out, but seeing her again and hearing her voice made all the anger resurface. She flinched, but she didn't argue. "I deserve that," she said quietly. "I won't defend what I did. I can't. But that's not why I asked you to meet." My eyes narrowed. "Then what is this about?" She hesitated, as if the words were a weight she couldn't lift. Finally, she raised her eyes to mine, her expression raw. "It's about what happened after the divorce." I frowned, patience wearing thin. "What happened?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You're not going to believe me, James, but you need to know who Mark really was." The mention of his name hit me like a punch to the gut. Mark, the man who had shattered my life, the man Sarah had chosen over me. I hadn't heard that name in years and had hoped I never would again. "What the hell are you talking about?" I asked, my tone sharp and threatening. She swallowed hard. "He wasn't who I thought he was. He wasn't just some guy. He lied to me, James, about everything." I stared at her, unblinking. "You expect me to care about your sob story? That your little affair didn't work out the way you planned?" She shook her head frantically. "No, it's not like that. You don't understand. Mark, he's not just a mistake I made. He's dangerous. He's ruined more than just my life." Her words hung in the air like a storm cloud. I wanted to scoff, to dismiss her and walk away, leaving her alone with her regrets. But something about her voice, the fear, the desperation, stopped me. "Dangerous?" I repeated, my skepticism evident. "What do you mean?" Sarah took a shaky breath, her hands gripping the edge of the table tightly. "After you left, I thought Mark was the answer. I thought he cared about me, that I'd made the right choice. But he was using me for money, for information, for things I can't even begin to explain. When I confronted him, he threatened me." She leaned in closer, her voice trembling. "And now he's back, James. And I think you're next." For a moment, my heart stopped. 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind, each one louder than the last, all screaming the same thing. "What the hell have you dragged me into, Sarah?" Before I could respond, her phone buzzed on the table. She flinched, grabbing it quickly, her face draining of color as she stared at the screen. "Who was that?" I demanded sharply. She didn't answer, her eyes glued to the phone. "Sarah," I said again, my tone hardening. "Who is it?" Finally, she looked up at me, her fear unmistakable. "It's him," she whispered. "It's Mark." And just like that, everything I thought I'd buried about my past began to resurface. Hearing his name sent a cold shiver through my veins. For 5 years, I had pushed him to the farthest recesses of my mind, along with all the memories of Sarah's betrayal. Yet here he was clawing his way back into my life. Sarah clutched her phone tightly, as if it were a live grenade about to detonate. I watched her carefully, my mind racing. "Mark? He's still in your life after all this time?" I asked, my voice sharp. She shook her head quickly. Not quite a nod, more a frantic denial. "I haven't seen him in years," she said, her voice trembling. "But he doesn't go away. He's been watching me, following me. He's dangerous, James." I stared at her, my jaw tightening. "You still didn't answer my question. What does this have to do with me?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Because I think he blames you." I blinked, confused. "Blames me? For what?" "You're the one who—" "I know," she interrupted, her eyes wide and desperate. "I know it was my mistake. But after the divorce, everything fell apart. He thought I was worth more, money, connection, something. When he realized I couldn't give him what he wanted, he turned on me. He said I ruined his life." She hesitated, her voice trembling. "That you ruined his life." A bitter laugh escaped before I could stop it. "So what? He's coming after me now? For what? Exactly? Revenge? I didn't even know the guy. Sarah lowered her gaze, her shoulders sagging. I don't know, she admitted. All I know is that he's back. He's been calling me, sending me messages. And last week, she trailed off, her voice cracking. Last week, I saw someone outside my apartment. A man. I didn't see his face, but it felt like him. I leaned back, trying to absorb what she was telling me. Sarah, the woman who had once been so composed and confident, now looked like a shadow of her former self. So, you brought me here to warn me? I asked, my tone flat. Yes. She met my eyes, her expression earnest. You deserve to know what you might be walking into. I left the diner that afternoon feeling as though the ground beneath me had shifted. Mark, his name echoed in my mind like a curse. I had spent 5 years piecing my life back together after Sarah and everything she'd destroyed. And now she was telling me the man she'd left me for was dangerous, and that I might be in his sights. I drove aimlessly for hours, my thoughts spinning. I wanted to dismiss it, to believe this was just another one of Sarah's manipulations. But the fear in her voice gnawed at me. Sarah wasn't a good liar. She couldn't fake that kind of desperation. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sun had dipped below the horizon. My phone buzzed in my pocket. For a split second, I thought it might be Sarah again, but it wasn't. Unknown number. I stared at the screen, unease curling in my chest. For a moment, I considered letting it ring out, but curiosity, or perhaps something darker, got the better of me. I answered, "Hello." Silence. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice firm. The line crackled before a voice came through. Low, smooth, and mocking. "Hello, James. Long time, no see." My blood ran cold. "Who is this?" I asked again, though deep down I already knew. The voice chuckled softly, a sound that sent a chill down my spine. "We'll be seeing each other soon." The line went dead. I stood there, frozen, the phone still pressed to my ear. The calm I had clung to for 5 years shattered in an instant. Sarah wasn't lying. Mark was back, and he wasn't finished with me. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, phone still in hand, staring at its blank screen as though it could give me answers. Over and over, I replayed the voice in my mind. Low, smooth, mocking. "We'll be seeing each other soon." Mark. I had never laid eyes on the man, not even once. And yet, here he was, a shadow from my past, now clawing his way into my present. I thought I'd put all of this behind me. Sarah, the betrayal, him. But clearly I was wrong. That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside, the groan of the wind, the hum of a passing car, snapped me awake. By the time morning came, I felt hollow, like a shell of myself. But I knew I couldn't leave it like this. I needed answers, and I knew exactly where to start. Sarah, if she was tangled in this mess, she wasn't going to pull me down without giving me the truth. The next morning, I called her. She picked up on the first ring, her voice frantic and breathless. "James, we need to talk," I said firmly. "Meet me. Same diner. 1 hour." She didn't argue. When I arrived, Sarah was already there, nervously stirring a cup of tea. She looked worse than the day before, paler, with dark circles under her eyes. It was clear she hadn't slept either. I slid into the booth and locked her with a hard stare. "Tell me everything, Sarah. No half-truths. No more hiding. Who is Mark?" Her hands trembled as they rested on the table. But after a long exhale, she began. "You already know how it started," she said softly. "He was the guy I cheated with." I cut her off bluntly. She winced but nodded. "Yes, I thought he was charming, confident. He promised me the world, James. And I believed him." She paused, then swallowed hard. "And then what?" I pressed. "Then everything unraveled," she admitted. Her voice shook as she spoke. "After you left, Mark started showing me who he really was. He wasn't the man I thought. He was controlling, manipulative. At first, I thought it was jealousy, but then it became more than that. He started asking for money, small amounts at first, but it kept growing. He said it was for investments, for us. But I realized too late that he wasn't the person I thought he was." Her voice dropped as she continued. barely audible. He wasn't just some regular guy. He was tied up in other things. Illegal things. What kind of illegal things? I demanded. Her eyes darted around, and she whispered, fraud, blackmail, and worse. I leaned back, my pulse racing. Why are you telling me all of this now? Because he's back, she said, her voice cracking. And he knows about you. He always hated you, James. He said you were the reason I couldn't give him what he wanted. He thinks you cost him everything. And if he's back now, he's not going to stop until he gets revenge. Revenge? I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping me. There was no humor in it. For what? You're the one who destroyed our marriage, Sarah. I didn't even know the man existed until it was too late. Tears welled up in her eyes. I know, she said, her voice breaking. And I'm sorry. I was stupid. But, James, you have to take this seriously. He's dangerous. He's been watching me. And now he's going to come after you. I stared at her, anger and disbelief warring with an unsettling sense of dread. And why the hell should I trust you now? I asked coldly. After everything, how do I know you're not just making this up? Without a word, Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope. She slid it across the table. This, she said quietly. It's proof. I opened the envelope cautiously. Inside were photos, grainy, taken from a distance, but clear enough to make my stomach churn. The first photo was of me walking to my car. Another showed me sitting on my porch last week. The last one? Taken from outside my window. My blood ran cold. Where did you get these? I whispered, my voice barely audible. Sarah's voice trembled. They were left on my doorstep 2 days ago. No note, no explanation. Just those photos. I stared at the images, my pulse pounding in my ears. Someone had been watching me. Mark wasn't just a shadow of the past anymore. He was here, in my present, and for the first time in years, I felt the walls closing in. James, Sarah's voice broke through my spiraling thoughts. I'm scared. He's playing a game with us, and I don't think it's going to end well. I didn't reply. My hands gripped the photos tightly, my mind racing. For so long, I believed the worst was behind me. But now it was clear this was just the beginning. Driving home, I placed Sarah's envelope on the passenger seat. It felt like a ticking bomb, an unsettling reminder of just how close Mark had gotten. My knuckles turned white as I clenched the steering wheel, my mind spinning with unanswerable questions. How long had I been watched? How far would Mark go? When I finally pulled into my driveway, an eerie chill crept up my spine. My house, once a place of peace and security, now felt exposed. Vulnerable, like Mark's eyes were on me. Even now, I scanned the street, searching for anything out of place. Nothing. Everything looked normal, too normal. Inside, I locked the door behind me and checked every window, every corner of every room, even the basement. Nothing. And yet, I couldn't shake the sensation that I wasn't alone. Collapsing onto the couch, I spread the photos out across the coffee table. Each one was a reminder of how far Mark had infiltrated my life. This wasn't just about Sarah anymore. He had crossed a line, and I couldn't sit back and do nothing. The next morning, I called Jake, my closest friend, the one person I trusted without hesitation. I hadn't shared much with him about Sarah's call or Mark, but I needed his take on the situation. When Jake arrived, he walked in holding 2 coffees, his usual laid-back energy in full force. You sounded weird on the phone, man. What's going on? Wordlessly, I handed him the photos. Jake's easygoing demeanor evaporated the moment he looked at them. What the hell? He muttered, flipping through the pictures. Where did these come from? Sarah, I replied flatly. She said they were left on her doorstep 2 days ago. Jake frowned, studying the images. And she thinks it's this Mark guy? I nodded. Yeah, same guy she cheated on me with. Apparently, he's dangerous and has some sort of grudge against me. Now she says he's back. Jake let out a low whistle, shaking his head. Man, you can't make this up. So, what are you going to do? That's the thing, I admitted, leaning back. I don't know. I mean, I could go to the cops, but what do I even say? My ex-wife's shady boyfriend from 5 years ago is stalking me? They'd laugh me right out of the station. Jake set the photos down, his expression serious. James, this isn't something you play around with. If this guy's watching you, he's already too close. You need to get ahead of him. How? I asked, frustration bubbling to the surface. I don't know where he is, what he wants, or what he's planning. Then find out, Jake said, his tone firm. Sarah has to know something. Where he live, who he talked to. If this guy's dangerous, you can't just sit around waiting for him to come to you. His words hit like a punch to the gut, but I knew he was right. Mark wasn't playing fair, and I couldn't afford to sit here, waiting for his next move. That night, I picked up the phone and called Sarah again. What now? She answered, her voice heavy with exhaustion. I need everything you know about Mark, I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. Where he's been, who he knows, anything that can help me find him, I pressed. Sarah hesitated. James, you don't want to do this. I don't have a choice, I shot back. He's been watching me, Sarah. I can't ignore this anymore. She sighed, and for a moment, I thought she might refuse. But then her tone softened. There's one place I can think of. After the divorce, when everything started falling apart, Mark stayed at an old house. His uncle's place, I think. It's on the edge of town. He said it was off the radar. Where? I demanded, pen in hand. She gave me the address. James, please be careful. I hung up without responding. The house was a decaying ruin. I pulled up late that night, my car's headlights slicing through the overgrown grass and illuminating the sagging wooden steps. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to turn around, but I couldn't. I needed answers. I approached slowly, my boots crunching against the gravel in the oppressive silence. The windows were dark, the entire property exuding a sense of abandonment. But something felt wrong, like the air itself was heavy and expected. Stepping onto the porch, I winced as the boards creaked under my weight. I knocked, once, twice. No answer. Tentatively, I tried the handle, and to my surprise, the door creaked open. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of dust and decay. Furniture was covered in sheets, cobwebs draped the corners, and the dim light barely reached the walls. It looked long abandoned, but the details told another story. Boot prints tracked through the dust, and a half-empty water bottle sat on a table. Then I saw it. Pinned to the wall was a photo of me, taken only days ago. Next to it was a map of my neighborhood, with red circles marking places I frequented. My house, my office, even the diner where I'd met Sarah. My stomach sank. This wasn't just surveillance. This was a plan. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked behind me. I froze. James, the voice. His voice. It sent a chill racing down my spine. I turned slowly, and there he was, a figure standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the night. Mark! He stepped forward, his face slipping into the faint light, a smirk tugging at his lips. I told you we'd be seeing each other soon, he said. My fists clenched, adrenaline coursing through my veins. What the hell do you want? Mark tilted his head, his smirk never faltering. Oh, James, he drawled. You're about to find out. And then, without warning, the lights went out. The room plunged into suffocating darkness. My pulse thundered in my ears as I stood frozen, every muscle tensed. James? Mark's voice echoed through the void, taunting. I fumbled for my phone, fingers shaking as I turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the shadows, illuminating the empty room. Mark was gone. I spun around, the light sweeping over every corner and doorway. Show yourself! I shouted, my voice hoarse. Silence. I didn't wait to see what game Mark was playing. My instincts screamed at me to leave, and I wasn't about to argue. I bolted for the door, my boots slamming against the floor, and sprinted to my car. Once inside, I locked the doors, gripping the wheel with trembling hands. For a moment, I sat there, staring at the house. It loomed quietly under the moonlight, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. Mark had been there. He wanted me to know this wasn't over. As I sped out of the driveway, my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. A text. Unknown number. Running already? This is just the beginning. My blood turned to ice. When I got home, I barricaded the front door and checked every lock, every window. Sleep was out of the question. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the message on my phone, the weight of it pressing down on me. Mark wasn't just watching anymore. He was hunting me, and I had no idea how far he was willing to go. The next day, I couldn't focus. At work, I stared blankly at my computer screen, Mark's message looping in my mind like a broken record. This is just the beginning. I was being hunted, and the worst part? I had no idea what Mark wanted. By lunchtime, I couldn't take it anymore. I made up an excuse and left the office, my thoughts a chaotic mess. Sitting in my car, I called Sarah. She answered on the first ring, her voice shaking. "James? What's going on?" "Mark found me," I said, cutting straight to the point. "Last night, I went to that house. He was there. He knew I'd come, Sarah. This isn't just stalking. He's planning something." Her breath caught. Did he hurt you?" "No," I said through gritted teeth. "But he left me a message. He's not done." There was a pause, the weight of her silence pressing through the line. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You need to get out of town, James. I'm serious. If he's back, you're not safe." I scoffed, my frustration boiling over. "Run? That's your solution? You think I'm gonna let him win? You don't understand what he's capable of," she said, her voice cracking. "He ruined my life, James. He won't stop until—" "Then help me stop him," I interrupted, my tone sharp. "I don't know how," she whispered. "Think I snapped? You knew him better than anyone. There has to be something I can use. Somewhere he hides. Someone he trusts. Anything." She was silent for a long moment, and I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. Finally, she spoke. "He had a storage unit. He was obsessed with keeping records, files, pictures, anything he could use to control people. It's how he blackmailed me." A flicker of hope ignited. "Where?" "Westfield Storage. Unit 37, she said hesitantly. "But, James, please don't go alone." I hung up before she could say more, already starting the car. I wasn't going to wait for Mark to make the next move. The storage facility sat on the outskirts of town, the kind of place no one would notice if you went missing. The wind whipped through the empty lot, carrying an eerie warning to turn back. But I couldn't. Unit 37 was tucked in the farthest row, half hidden behind a cluster of overgrown brush. My heart pounded as I approached, flashlight in hand. The padlock on the unit was broken. Someone had been here recently. Stealing myself, I pushed the door open. The air was thick with dust, and rows of boxes lined the walls. Files, photographs, evidence. I rifled through them, my hands shaking as I searched for anything that could explain this nightmare. And then I found it, a manila folder with my name scrawled across the front. James R. Inside were photos of me, pictures spanning years, some from when I was married to Sarah, others more recent. Some I recognized. Others were taken when I thought I was alone, at work, at the gym, on my porch. My stomach twisted. Mark had been watching me for far longer than I'd realized. At the bottom of the folder was a single note written in jagged, messy handwriting. "I'm always 2 steps ahead." My phone buzzed in my pocket, making me jump. A text. "Unknown number. Nice of you to drop by, James. Check outside." I turned toward the door, every nerve in my body on edge. Through the narrow window, I saw headlights cutting through the darkness, moving slowly toward the unit. Mark! He was here, and I had nowhere to run. The headlights grew brighter, their beams piercing through the thin metal door of the unit like blades. My pulse thundered as I pressed myself against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. Mark wasn't here to scare me. This wasn't a game anymore. This was the end game. I slipped my hand into my jacket, gripping my phone. My fingers fumbled to hit record before sliding it back into my pocket. If this went south, someone needed to know what happened. The hum of the engine died, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Then came the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps, each one echoing like a drumbeat in the stillness. The door creaked open, and there he was. Mark! He was taller than I'd imagined, broad-shouldered, his demeanor calm, like a man who'd done this before. A smug smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth as he stepped inside. "James," he said softly, his voice smooth and laced with mockery. "You've been busy." I didn't reply. My eyes darted around the room, scanning for anything I could use, a weapon, an exit. Mark stepped further in, his hands casually resting in his coat pockets, as if we were old friends meeting after years apart. "I told you we'd be seeing each other soon," he continued, his tone casual. "And here you are, digging through my things. Why?" I demanded, my voice low but steady. "What do you want from me?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "It's not about what I want, James. It's about what I owe you." "Owe me?" I shot back, my confusion giving way to anger. "I don't even know you." His smirk disappeared, his expression darkening. "No, but you took something from me. Sarah, her trust, her time. You ruined her for me. You made her useless." The sheer absurdity of his words made me pause. "You're insane," I said flatly. "Maybe," he replied coolly, reaching into his pocket. A small knife glinted in his hand. "But I always finish what I start." My pulse quickened, my body tensing as I gauged the distance between us. "I don't think so," I said sharply, keeping my voice steady. "I know about you, Mark. The scams. The blackmail. Sarah told me everything. And guess what? I sent it all to the police before I came here." His smirk faltered, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "You're bluffing? Am I?" I took a step forward, narrowing the space between us. "How do you think I found this place, Mark? You're not as untouchable as you think." For the first time, doubt clouded his expression. He tightened his grip on the knife, his confidence visibly shaken. "You should have stayed out of it, James," he hissed. "Now it's too late." He lunged. I moved just in time, the blade missing my side by inches. Grabbing a metal box from a nearby shelf, I swung it hard, hitting his arm and sending the knife clattering to the floor. Mark stumbled back, cursing under his breath, but he wasn't done. He charged again, slamming me into the wall. Pain flared through my back, and my vision blurred, but adrenaline kept me moving. I shoved him off, scrambling for the knife and gripping it tightly as I held it between us. "Don't," I growled, my voice edged with warning. "It's over, Mark. Walk away while you still can." For a moment, he stood frozen, chest heaving, his eyes wild with rage. I braced myself, expecting him to attack again. Then we both heard it, the distant wail of sirens. The panic on his face was unmistakable. "You son of a—" Mark spat, backing toward the door. "This isn't over, James. I'll find you." I didn't move as he bolted out of the storage unit, disappearing into the night. Moments later, red and blue lights flashed across the lot, illuminating the scene as police swarmed in. Hours later, I sat in the back of a police car, recounting everything. Sarah, the photos, the threats, Mark's attack. The folder I'd found was enough to connect him to far more than just me. An officer approached, his face grim. "We've got a team searching for him," he said. "If he's still in town, we'll find him." I nodded, exhaustion crashing over me. The next day, my phone buzzed. It was Sarah. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice unsteady, filled with worry. "I'm fine," I replied. "Mark's gone for now, but he'll get what's coming to him." Sarah let out a long sigh. "I'm sorry, James, for everything." For the first time, I believed her. "It's over now," I said, though the words felt more like reassurance to myself than to her. The weeks that followed were a blur as the dust began to settle. Mark was caught trying to flee the state, and the charges stacked up quickly: fraud, harassment, attempted assault, and more. As for me, I felt something I hadn't in years: freedom. The ghosts of the past, Sarah's betrayal, Mark's threats, my own lingering anger, were finally gone. I packed up my life and moved to a new city, finding a small place with no history, no memories tied to it. It was a blank slate, and I embraced it. Sarah didn't call again after that last conversation. Maybe she was rebuilding her life too. I didn't know, and I didn't care. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was at peace. Mark thought he could haunt me forever, but in the end, I'd won. And I wasn't looking back.